All right. I am excited to welcome members of the Nova Aera Collective, which was born out of the partnership between CSI at ASU, the Center for Science and the Imagination, and the whole cohort was led by Madeline Henderson, and they created this really fantastical imaginary world that sees the future and the dynamics of like or policies or environments or politics of marginalized groups and voices. I had such a fascinating time reading the collaborative novel. I would love to dive right in, and anyone can feel free to jump in. Like, what sort of aspects of your life like inspired you to bring in the different themes that you brought in your stories or in the world? Like, where are you from, and what were some of the major themes in like growing up that inspired you as a writer to explore?
Maddie, I think you should start first.
Okay. Um, well, as we all know, we're in kind of troubling times with a divided government, and newer generations are starting to realize that there are huge negative effects of capitalism that impact all of us, regardless of what like where we're from and what time we're born. And also, there's quite a few of us who feel like climate change and the negative impacts of climate change aren't properly being addressed by our current government system. And I think for me, writing was a way of expressing kind of my feelings about that, and also a way for me to jot down potential futures and how we can either achieve them and do better with what we have today, or just explain the consequences if we don't take matters into our own hands. I also think that just creative writing in general is such a it's a beautiful process of self growth, and I feel so blessed, so lucky to have had this opportunity to be able to collaborate in this beautiful art piece that we've created, because it's such a rich story, and it's rich because it came from so many different minds with so many different backgrounds and so many different experiences. So who's next?
Yeah, I want to respond to what you said. I think it's I
Sure.
like we are at an extremely pivotal time in our human history. It's like people are recognizing
Mhm.
like the way things are and the way things are set up are just not functioning. Yes, we have
Mhm.
innovations. Yes, we have a good living standard. Yes, we have so many of these things that have evolved and brought us a modern society, but like we look all around us, there's these intersecting crises. And I think a key word that you said was imagining possible futures. I would love to open it for others to respond to what Madeline said, but also like what has sort of motivated you as an individual writer to and the ideas that you brought to the collective and building that world, Nova Era.
So I would love to touch on what Maddie was just exploring, because you know, she's not wrong. It's a very fraught time in human history. And in this current time and space, I think it is unique, but the general idea of challenge is not something new to humans, right? This is something that has been here forever, and why, people progress and change and imagine, right? And so bringing that to my personal experience as a writer, and this opportunity to be a creative writer has been really exciting, because I think from a young age I've been kind of a raging optimist. And so it was really fun to kind of explore the duality of being challenged, but to Maddie's point, being able to imagine a new world. So yeah, it was just such a phenomenal exercise of trying to find hope while being grounded in what is.
Thank you so much, Libbie. Yeah, how was that experience of imagining a new future? Was there challenges, Allison or Chandler, and what sort of values and things that you wanted to see?
Yeah, I think something that was really exciting about like just the time and phase that this writing coalition came about was towards the end of our master's degree, when we had just spent about 2 years really diving in to the success and failures of what has either helped groups succeed in life and achieving like a life full of well-being, but also we were starting to imagine what this world would look like if we take no change, if we do nothing to try to make the world a little better in our generation, and how this is going to look in the next generation and generations to follow. So this, after having had that practice of imagining different futures and imagining both optimistic ones as well as ones that we would like to never imagine in our wildest dreams, I think this book really allowed us to kind of synthesize a lot of what we just learned about the makings of our world today. And we're all able to kind of contribute a little bit of those learnings into this collaborative piece. So we all just finished the Global Development and Technology program. And I think it's really interesting to see how we were able to still represent a little bit of what we had been learning and studying for the last 2 years and process it in our own ways in a creative outlet as well, which was a new form of writing, especially for myself, and was a really exciting way to also grow my creative writing, kind of taking it out of that academic space and pulling it into one that is more accessible for more populations, so we can all walk away with this knowledge. And I think maybe even help others start to imagine what a world might look like to them based off of what they know to be true about our world.
That's incredibly powerful snaps indeed. Thank you to all of you. And Chandler, how was the experience for you, and how did that you integrate parts of yourself where you're from into the world and the creative writing process?
Sure. So, I grew up always having a dream in the back of my mind that creative writing and writing in general was something that I wanted to pursue in some form, in some way. And up until I had moved to Arizona, I hadn't really ever explored that idea. It was always just an idea and always just a dream. And then moving to Arizona and joining the Masters of Science in Global Technology and Development at ASU, and meeting Maddie and Allison and Libbie, and coming up with these ideas independently, but then also collectively, and then sharing them together in brainstorming sessions that were, bi-weekly or weekly, led by Maddie. I remember the first meeting that we had, and we were all, excited but unsure of where exactly this was going to lead, and how it was going to take shape. And as we progressed within our meetings and brainstormed together collectively, the idea of Nova Aera started to take shape and formalize into this shared collective novel that we all co-authored. And I just thought the ideas that we came up with were so interesting and unique in terms of the structure of the way that it was formatted, with the 3 different eras in which we were assigned, or not assigned, in which we had decided to write and share this writing space with our team members. And it ended up becoming a very unique piece of writing that, all of the ideas blended together in some way, yet they were all separate and individual and unique in their own way. And it led to the creation of Nova Aera. And I think that each of us are very satisfied and pleased with how it came about and where we ended up.
I think that's incredible. I feel like when collaborations, I think there's something so magical that happens. It's like you're meeting with people and you're imagining possibilities, and you start to get to know people very differently too. And through the process of world building, you're having conversation about society, or about philosophy, or about history, or about structure, about personal storytelling. Like, what was that process to kind of imagine a hopeful future, but also put in some elements that can be very dystopic and Nova Era? Because I felt like when I was reading, I was I was so elated when I read the evolution of like the powers of like people really kind of tapping into their own power, and also the sort of spirit aspect of the natural world kind of calling into people, and then juxtaposed within just this massive structure that is maintained, and that is sort of operated. But I feel like I'm like telling everyone about the world. But I would love if you all could kind of tell us a little bit more about how did you like, what is Nova Era, and what parts of the world that do you like the most, and what was something that how did the world reveal itself to you as you like collaborated and created and wrote and ideated? Anyone can jump in.
Maddie, you led this process. This is tailor-made question for you.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I gave everyone else a chance before I started talking. But I personally went into this experience with a completely open mind. For my master's thesis, I co-authored a science fiction novel with Chandler, and that was my first kind of taste of collaborating on a huge writing project. And I don't think that I had any idea whatsoever of what this world was going to be like at the end. It slowly progressed each week, little piece by piece, almost like discovering a new piece of a map. After we discussed what we wanted, the themes that we wanted to tackle, our characters and the struggles of our characters, and what made them who they are, their environment and societal issues. And I don't think I had any idea, and I don't think I could have even tried to picture what it became, because it goes so far beyond what I'm capable of, because I wasn't the only collaborator. It came from 8 different minds. And that's the crazy, beautiful thing about it, is that it's so diverse and there's so many different components. And you can really feel when I say like the richness of the story, because it has so many different perspectives, so many different themes. These characters are just like, somehow, some way, there's little threads connecting them to the world, but they really are unique, and they really do come from a diverse, brilliant group of people. So it's definitely something I'm proud of, but I don't think I could ever have pictured what this was going to turn out to be. But I'm definitely very, very proud of the final masterpiece that we have today. Anyone else would like to go next?
Yeah, Maddie, I think so I am a novice writer. I am very new to tapping into my creative writing style, especially. And I think something that was so liberating about this process was the fact that when I felt really limited in idea or scope or even direction of what comes next, this is a huge, daunting idea. We're coming together. We're trying to all make sense of this world that we just created. The majority of the ideas aren't our own. So trying to interpret or to work with the idea proposer themselves to be like, am I capturing this right? Is this making sense? Is this how your character might respond? Or was this what you had an idea about when it came to like the spiritual connection between human and environment? That then it allowed, like out of that 30-minute conversation, it allowed all this creativity to start to pour, especially when I think something like writer's block can be really intimidating, especially as a newer writer. And to be able to go to people within this group and lean on them for moments of inspiration or advice on writing our chapter. It was a really exciting way to kind of go into something that, I know personally, the idea of writing a book was something that I was really excited to dip my toes into, but the whole entire process as a whole is like this ginormous scary monster. But when you have the opportunity to break it up and like really feel safe with those that you're collaborating with to come up with this new world, I think it really allows for a sense of liberation in the writing process and knowing that you can do it because you have others that will help you cross that finish line.
Yeah, a small anecdote to what you're just saying, Al. I remember the day, I think you were reading over my chapter and you're like, you have quotes in here. You have dialogue. I didn't even think about that because it's such a different way of writing compared to, academic, journal writing. And so shifting into that creative space was so much fun. And it was kind of like unlocking different doors in the mind and like going back to, pre master's program when we had time to read and like as a kid when you pick up a picture book and you kind of start to create those images in your mind too, and ask yourself, okay, how can I paint this picture so that my chapter was the underwater chapter, so how can I create this picture so the reader can also experience this like underwater space that I haven't been to. I don't think anyone has been to a space where there's a international board of underwater sea creatures, so kind of having fun with it, and I think that's one thing that going back to your previous question, Fabrice, of it's a heavy world, but how can we make something light and fun and intriguing, so that we can grapple with those questions, and then I would also like to just touch on one of the concepts that we talked a lot about in our master's program of zooming in and zooming out. And so this was something that I thought of a lot in this process, because you would zoom into your chapter and really get to know your characters and know the space in which they're like inhabiting. And then you zoom out to your timeline and you talk. I was working with one other woman who's not here today, about, okay, how are our chapters going to connect, this underwater ecosystem and this above land human community? How are we going to connect these? And then talk to Allison, who has chapter 2, and connect a sea turtle all the way through, so that you initially start reading this book and you say, oh my goodness, a sea turtle, how gorgeous. And then maybe 45, 50, 100 pages later, you meet that sea turtle and you really get to know them so much more. And so yeah, it was a really fun zooming in and zooming out, like dance of creativity.
what would you say is, this is out of my curiosity, what would you say is like the personal transformation from creating a world and then writing with others? Was there a personal transformation that happened to you in your life? Do you feel like you have more permission to do things, or do you see the world differently? Like what were sort of the transformations that happened to you when you imagined this possible world and future with other people?
I think personally, for me, the process of writing collaboratively with such a diverse and interesting group really demonstrated how possible it was for exciting things to get done by a group in a collaborative setting, and the ability to brainstorm together. And the old adage comes to mind that two heads are better than one, while eight heads are better than one as well. So being able to work on this all together, brainstorm in weekly sessions, check in with each other, like Libbie said, reach out to the people who have neighboring chapters in order to try and coordinate some flow and fluidity between chapters in the storyline. Obviously, not making things exactly the same because we all want to have our own individual chapters. But if certain aspects can tie in together, then that just strengthens the overall plot of the novel in a way that it is pretty special, and ends up making a work that is much better off with all of our input rather than if we had tried to do this each individually on our own.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. Yeah, I remember your story. It's like it had a lot of elements around nature, the natural world. And like, is that something that you're passionate about? Is that something that you care? I know that, or in our times today, the environment is becoming something that more and more people are yearning, but I'm intrigued to hear, Chandler, like why did the environment sort of play such a big theme, or the forest specifically?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's from the northwestern U.S., up in northwestern Montana, the mountains and the forests and clean water are something that I grew up with and held very dearly to my life in ways that I would try my best to spend as much time outside as possible. And I've tried to continue that as much as I can here in the Phoenix area, and thankfully Central Arizona and Arizona in general offers a, a strong plethora of outdoor biomes that are each unique and interesting in their own way. And so I felt that tying in somewhere in the middle of the novel and choosing the lane of a character who's in the transitionary period between when in the past, when things were similar to how they would be nowadays, and then in the far future where everything has transitioned and is much different than what we can imagine now. Somewhere in that transitionary period is where I wanted to place my character, and to have them be surrounded by nature, and take the personification of someone who has left Nova Era, and they were one of the first people to do so, and what their perspective was. I felt was something that benefited the story, but also was able to tie in personal anecdotes in terms of the appreciation for nature.
I love that. And Madeline, like you wrote specifically in like the arteries, and I like the character Tala, like the very strong female character that kind of sees what's really happening and the country, and then the difference. And I like the cat when you included the, so there's a lot of different themes that I really enjoyed as well in you. So can you speak more on the arteries? What is the arteries, and what inspired this character for you?
Sure. So the arteries is the lower levels of Nova Era, and it's more like the ground level, where a lot of the working class people in the first timeline live in. And it's kind of a metaphor for like today's working class and not having fair access to natural resources compared to the top 1%. And there's a corrupt government, quite like ours, and police brutality. And then, of course, there's the Welkins, who live above the Terras, who represent the top 1% and the wealthiest population in the city, Nova Aera. Most of it was just a metaphor for our society today. So there's not a whole lot of creativity that went into that. It was really just coming up with very cool, catchy names for the metaphors. Tala is this strong young woman who was born pretty much an orphan from the start and had a really tough life, and had to essentially learn how to take care of herself in a cruel, unfair world. And I tried to make her feel relatable to just about anyone who read about her, because she's stubborn, and she gets so angry, and she's so angry about her situation, and yet she still, just trenches through all of the difficulty. And she has this stray cat that is her best friend and only family member, and they do absolutely everything together, just like my cat and I. Eventually she becomes one of the first groups to leave Nova Aera, because it becomes so corrupt and just toxic, just not just emotionally toxic, but physically toxic for people living on the lower levels of Nova Aera. And she's one of the first groups of people who's brave enough to leave this trapped situation. And she's certainly an interesting character. I think that it's really important for characters to not only be relatable, but flawed. They have to have flaws, because sometimes our flaws end up being some of our strongest characteristics, our strongest personality traits that really help us get through tough situations. So yeah, I'd like for her to be inspiring to the readers.
Yeah, yes, definitely was inspiring for sure, and thank you for that. And Allison, your story, I felt like there's a lot of like themes around like education. Is this something that you're passionate about? Like, what were sort of your ideas behind this as someone that is new to creative writing? But perhaps you've done a lot of nonfiction or academic writing, which I know you've mentioned before, but like, could you dive in a little bit more into that in that process? Like, when did you sort of solidify, this is the story I'm going to write, and this is how it's gonna express itself in the world?
Yeah, so my story with Madame Uju taking on the role of being kind of a soul teacher in the arteries and really taking special care of the orphans came out of my recent experience and research that I had done in the months leading up to writing my chapter, where I got the opportunity to spend 2 months in Lesotho, which is a small country in Southern Africa. And there I had, prior to ASU, been a Peace Corps volunteer where I taught high school math. So I had already started to get a little bit of a glimpse of the education system, especially in a hardship country, and had a whole new appreciation towards the work of teachers globally. I'm a firm believer that a strong education system results in strong citizens, and that any work there is to elevate stories of teachers and the importance and impact of education, I think is an important opportunity to take. And so I had just spent about 2 months interviewing teachers, primary school teachers in Lesotho, to understand their challenges, especially around resources, and their hopes for their students, and how they imagine their classroom in 5-10 years if it had the resources that they needed to succeed. And so I was just coming off of that. Actually, for my final project, I created a short documentary on the experiences of teachers in Lesotho. And so I I'm like fresh in like the post-production stage at that point, pulling together that narrative. And I just wanted an opportunity to kind of also synthesize the 33 interviews I had just come off of doing and share some messages that these teachers experienced and felt. And so a lot of my inspiration towards what Madame Uju was kind of going through in doing whatever she could to offer education to the children in the arteries came out of the narratives that that was shared with me in Lesotho from real teachers trying to get quality education to their learners. So it was something I wanted to continue writing about, and it was a huge pillar of creativity for me as a whole at that time in my life. So leaning into that and kind of getting to share a little bit of my experiences in a more creative way was a large inspiration for Madame Uju, which Uju is Zulu for honey. So she's kind of sweet like honey, the character herself. And I wanted to make sure the name kind of embraced that, and the women who shared their stories of teaching. Zulu is a language you can find spoken in Lesotho, so it felt appropriate.
Thank you so much. That's incredible. How it's like you're able to sort of like it's sort of like the world building. You're able to bring your full self into it, and there's like no wrong answer, and you do it in a sort of reimagined a framework. Thank you. And Libbie, and I know you mentioned a little bit about your story around the ocean and the council, the underwater council. Like, tell us more about, like, did you grow up near the beach? Like, or did you have a deep passion for the oceans? And what was that process for you, kind of bringing yourself into the world and the world revealing itself to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't really do my homework before coming in, so I just pulled up my chapter, and there's just like so much that is part of this, and I feel like everything just has a meaning. You know, each decision, word choice, you know, how things are connected, it has a meaning. So I'm gonna try not to go on too long, but I ended up moving out here from Massachusetts. So New England, definitely the ocean was a big part of my growing up. Me and my mom always would go there in the summertime, and you know, it was always cold, so a lot of times I wouldn't even go in, but just the presence of ocean is something that brings so much peace to like the mind. And you know, I think that also helped me decide after my undergrad to do the Peace Corps, similar to Allison. Chandler didn't mention it, but he's also an RPCV. And so I ended up volunteering in a country called Timor-Leste, which is over near Indonesia, a small island developing state. And it was just such a phenomenal adventure being out there. And I would go down to some of my friends' sites down by the ocean, and we would, you know, jump in and kind of just see the clearest waters, and you know, have little fish swimming around our legs, and talk to the you know, woman fisher folk in the area, and hear their stories about, you know, what it's like to be kind of the pillar of community, economically, culturally, and environmentally, you know, making sure that these spaces are safe, particularly, you know, kind of the more, I'm trying to think of the word, but the bridge between ocean and land. Yeah, I forget what word I'm looking for, but so those are all things from my past that kind of brought me to the ocean. And then when it came to grad school, a lot of what I looked at was the rights given to natural spaces, you know, and I think looking at the corporate entities that are given personhood under the law. You know, it's a question as to, you know, why aren't rivers and, you know, oceans and valleys given legal personhood under the law? And so this kind of came from those studies. And yeah, I figured since one of the big pieces that promoted power for the wealthy was this resource called a quapper. And a quapper is an underwater resource, you know, and so all of these chapters touch on, or maybe they don't even touch on a quapper, but it's part of this world. And so the fact that it's part of this world, I was just like, the world that it's being taken from needs to be acknowledged. You know, the world that has lived with it, has taken care of it for so long, needs to be acknowledged, which was what made me decide to go underwater. And yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else about the chapter that, I mean, we do have the ocean spirit. I don't want to give away too much, keep people interested, but the ocean spirit is definitely, you know, part of, I think, not just the ocean, but of humans and what makes the world magical. And so I wanted to give that kind of essence of magic a voice as well. Yeah, I think that's about everything.
No, thank you so much. I think all the stories that you've all written is so dynamic, and this world, I think, is only gonna. It's just I feel worlds just grow and grow and grow, and I think it's just waiting for others to kind of jump in and imagine with. And I'm intrigued to. This is a personal question, because I personally believe that we need imagination to survive, and I feel like imagination, that's what's gonna save like humanity. So like I'm wondering, like, and perhaps we touched base about this a little bit in the earlier parts of the interview, but like, what was it like to imagine within a world possible futures, but not only imagine by yourself, but imagine with other people within the world? What was that process like for you, and how does this differ to like your sort of traditional imaginations of the future, like by yourself or in your day-to-day? Like, what was that? What is sort of the boundaries or the difference? I know that might be a big question, but I'd love to hear sort of your thoughts around like the process of imagining and within the world with other people, and how that's different than your sort of day-to-day imaginations or throughout your life. What was so unique about this?
I'll start with this one. It makes me go back to some of our first meetings as a group. We're still getting to know each other, understand each other's backgrounds a bit. At this point, we had all brought together our initial idea of our story without even knowing how that might plug in all together. So we're still in like the very infant stages of brainstorming. And we were really trying to decide as a group, what type of world do we want to project into our world, right? We are not just ideating this world, but we're also going to share it for other people to consume. And wanting to know what that world might be like that we can kind of share with others. And I had realized pretty early on that I had a rather pessimistic worldview that I was kind of coming in with. And it resulted in a pretty big conversation about what is our role, or what could our impact be in also imagining a world that is severely affected by the choices we're making today, while also still having a bit of hopefulness to it, right? Not letting it all just be in shambles, this world, and that's just how we kind of then maybe internalize that and accept that as what it could be. Whereas still trying to figure out how can we lean into sharing some I think, hopeful moments, some moments of empathy, some moments of realness. That's not this doom and gloom reality that I think a lot of us had initially come to the table with. And it was a conversation that Libbie had really spurred amongst us, which really got us all thinking. Like, I feel like typically I'm a more optimistic person, and to kind of think like, yeah, like if we continue to share this narrative of this like hopeless world where there's nothing to do at that point, people can internalize that and start to make that an aspect of their reality today, which is something that we're not trying to progress through this narrative, and really starting to digest, like, how do we still keep it real then, and like exposing people and making them question maybe their habits today towards a reality like the arteries, the Nova Era, and this incredible division? Or how can we also still keep like this aspect of hope in it, which I think kind of comes through that spirit energy throughout the book, of this hope, and this hope for nature to really succeed and flourish, and how our world would look like if we really embrace that, and how maybe today we can start to think of a world and live in a world where we're embracing that. And I think that was a really impactful conversation that I took away so early on, and I held pretty close to my heart throughout. It was kind of this reality of what world are we trying to share with others.
Incredible.
I'll go next. So to feed off of that, I think there's this famous quote by a baseball player, Yogi Berra, and it's, if you don't know where you're going, you may end up somewhere else. I think in the 21st century, we don't really have an excuse for not being more proactive and planning for the future. And really, we should be doing that. I mean, we should have been doing that this entire time. And if that was our thought process of more imaginative and like future forward thinking processes, maybe we wouldn't be where we are today. But I do believe that if we incorporate these types of processes in our government, in our daily lives, amongst just friendly discussion, it sparks that sort of thinking. And I think that that is the first step to change. And for me, this storyline was a way for me to try to make a change and try to fix problems that I saw that are far too big for myself or even 100 people to fix. And I think that creative writing is one of those outlets. Even though it is a form of entertainment, it casts this enormous audience, and it gets all of these people really thinking. If you start to think about these science fiction stories, episodes, movies that made huge impacts on your life and like made you really think like, oh my God, I don't ever want that to happen. Or, oh my, like, yeah, I want to live in that future. How do I like take a time machine over to that one? And it like storytelling is such a powerful tool. It really is. And I think it's so important in order for us to progress as a species, to have, life for the next few hundred years, and to develop as a species, is to allow imagination to be valued at just as important of a tool and process as statistical analysis or anything like that, because it is part of our human nature. It is what differentiates us from the other species that live on this planet, or at least most of them. And it's a powerful tool set that we need to take advantage of.
Incredible. I really appreciate what you're saying, Madeline and Allison. I feel like so true. It is an incredible tool that is underutilized across our systems, and we're just we're comfortable with the way things have been. We're sort of born into the world, and things function a certain way, and we couldn't continue working in that way. And then we realize before it's too late. It's almost as if it's like these imaginative spaces, these worlds are almost like vortexes of like possibilities. We're coming to the end of the podcast, and I want to say that I am incredibly proud of every single member of Nova Aera Collective, not only for what you've created and imagined in this very fantastical sci-fi futuristic world, that integrates so much aspects, but also I personally see the world as manifestos. You're making a statement like, this is the future. This is a possible world if we continue the way that we are doing. This is a possible world that we could live in. These are possible characters that are complex or nuanced that can inspire us to see the world differently. And I think the reason why I'm so proud is because I think a lot of the vision with Syllable is that we want to expand in college and universities, community colleges around the world. And you all are the first university-based collective. And I think that in the future, a vision of mine for Syllable is to have more artist collectives on campuses. And also specifically, the framework is that more students at Arizona State University can also play, can also dance, can also imagine with you after you're far gone, have graduated, in Nova Aera, the Nova Aera world, and kind of engage new cast of characters, imagine within the framework. So you have the stage. Like, what advice would you give to future students, not only students in the potential upcoming years that are going to be writing in Nova Aera, but also students and individuals from across different types of lives who will be creating worlds, who perhaps have never collaborated, perhaps have never written in creative writing sessions? Like, what advice would you give based on your personal experience, both to potential new students in the future writing in Nova Aera, but also potential on the global stage members or people that are going to be forming new possible worlds? What advice would you have wished to hear from like yourself from the future? So you're speaking to the future right now, the past to the future to the past.
I want to let the other people go, and I'll go last this time.
All right. And I'm looking at time. If you can make it maybe 30 seconds to a minute as well, that would be fantastic too.
I would say just do it. You got to do it. You got to write. You got to communicate. You got to collaborate. You got to put yourself out there. You got to be willing to make mistakes, take those steps necessary in order to grow and improve. I think that while you do that, you also have to recognize that not everything is going to be perfect every single time. That, as long as you're trying and as long as you are putting words down on paper, that there's always room for improvement, and whether that's personal improvement or collaboration between a team, you just got to do it. You can't hold yourself back and be afraid. You got to be courageous and be willing and do it as much as you can to not only work alone, but work with like-minded people and befriend those like-minded people and make those relationships with your team in order to be able to really create something as special as we did.
A bit tangential, but I think very much interconnected, is to support creators of all kinds. Go to the museum, go to the library, forget Amazon and support creators, because the means are the ends. And so if you're supporting creatives, it's a good way to find a more creative and inclusive world.
Yeah, I think the most important message that I would have loved to hear was, don't be afraid to ask for help. This is a space to only foster growth and creativity. And when you're not making yourself vulnerable to being corrected or being offered new ideas. I think you're also limiting yourself from becoming a more powerful writer and tapping into your creative space. So I think in this process, really lean on others in your collective. You have no idea how exciting and inspirational even like a 10-minute conversation can leave you for writing that next section of your chapter.
Okay. Well, I guess my message would be to believe in yourself and trust in yourself, and that you're absolutely capable of anything you put your mind to. And don't ever listen to anyone who tells you otherwise. 100%, you are capable of whatever you put your mind to.
Incredible. Thank you so much to the Nova Aera Collective. And I wanted to give a special thank you to Ed Finn and the team at the Center for Science and the Study of the Imagination and at ASU. And also wanted to say thank you to the members of the collective that could not join us. I'm going to read out their names. Jay Yen, Karishma Kassad, Jenna N. Henshe, Line De Luon Young. Thank you to you all as well. And until next time, we'll hope to connect and with more stories. Thank you.